Welcome, Rune Weavers, to our continuing series, Runic Cosmology and the Heathen Pantheons. In this video, we're going to be discussing Part 5, the Vanir. If you are new to this series, my name is Birch the Rune Weaver, and I'm glad you are joining me. So, as we go through the different Vanir gods and goddesses, it seems important that we start with Gullveig. Chronologically, she is the first of the Vanir whom we meet. An unkillable goddess whose skin and body sparkled and shone like gold, irresistible to the Aesir gods who coveted her. Back in the very early days, shortly after Odin, Vili, and Ve made the world, a beautiful golden woman came into Odin's hall in Asgard. The sight of her made the gods greedy, and they threw spears at her and tossed her 3 times into a fire until she burned white hot. But no matter how much they tried to kill her, they could not make even a mark on her perfect gold skin. This goddess was Gullveig, one of the Vanir, a goddess of woman's magic and witchcraft. Like the Volva and Freya, she practices scythe, trance magic, which is the exclusive practice of women, except for Odin, though that's a later tale. After being burned 3 times, she also took on the name Heid, Bright One, and walked away from Asgard and traveled to Midgard, where she taught magic to the women that she met. She carries a staff as a symbol of her magic and power, a practice Volva, practitioners of Seid, follow to this day. The Aesir refused to pay any sort of recompense for the way that they treated Gullveig, and this was the event that led to the war between the Aesir and Vanir, a war that, for all the power of both sides, neither one could win. So, in the end, they came to a truce of peace, an exchange of hostages, and an agreement to end the war. Now, when we talk about the Vanir tribes, a lot of people will say, well, the Vanir are fertility gods, and the Aesir are more war gods or other categorizations. I think a lot of it really comes down to is, you could say the Vanir, they're fertility, but what about Thor? Thor also has a very strong aspect of a fertility god to him. You have other ones, such as among the Jotun, who have fertility aspects. And you can't really, unless you're talking about fertility of fish, when we get to Njord, can we call him a fertility god? He's in charge of the oceans. So, are they really just a separate tribe of fertility gods? And where did this belief come from? It's not very, you can't find necessarily equivalents of the Aesir in other religions, but there's some concept of like a war between different groups that end in, treaty or arrangements, such as among the Celts, Irish mythology. But again, it doesn't really line up with the Vanir. And many of the Vanir also are very closely tied to location and place. Frey is sometimes called one of the ancestors of Norway or Sweden. Skadi was Norway. So from what I've seen on this, what I've often considered the one more compelling and fascinating origins of the Vanir and the Aesir as 2 different tribes of gods that eventually find peace with one another and end up working together is evidence of some ancient religious synchronization between Indo-Europeans, those who brought the Aesir gods, Tiwaz or Tyr, Odin, Thor, and another group of people who were probably native to wherever the Indo-Europeans went when this synchronization happened, that led to enough of an intermixing between the two people after probably an initial conflict that they eventually merged their cultures, their gods, and their traditions. And this story of a war between the Aesir and Vanir that ended in peace and cooperation between the two tribes could be an echo of an ancient historical event where two tribes initially met with greed and covetousness on one side and being local, very difficult to kill on the other, that ended in peace. And not to go too far into the linguistics of it, but there's always been a lot of question how the Germanic Indo-European languages started having certain words and plural changes like we see now in English with goose, geese, mouse, mice, where vowel changes aren't used in other parts of the Indo-European languages. You put a letter or a sound on the end to indicate a change in plural, like the S sound in English. So where did this come from? To change the way a language works on that level, you'd be talking about some complete mixing of two different peoples with two different languages instituted from the time when basically you have then, as a child, hearing your parents speak in two different languages or dialects, and then the children who grew up in that environment combining the two into a new language. And so linguistically, mythologically, there's evidence that this has happened, even if there's not a whole lot else to go on. It's a fascinating thing and definitely a good rabbit hole to dive into. Now, when the peace came between the Aesir and the Vanir, they spat into a kettle, and the intermingled spit came to life. That may sound disgusting to us from the modern sense, but to the Vikings especially, that was actually quite normal. And when the spit came to life, it took the form of a wise old man who called himself Kvasir. Kvasir was the wisest of all the gods. He did not believe that wisdom should be kept hidden away somewhere. He wanted that wisdom to spread far and wide. So he traveled, and wherever he went, he would talk to people, share his knowledge, share his wisdom, share his understanding, and he made many friends in his travels, but unfortunately, he also made two very bad acquaintances. Their names were Filialir and Galar, and they were two dwarves who murdered him. When they killed him, they gathered all of his blood into 3 kettles, where it became the mead of poetry. Anyone who drank from them became a gifted poet. But all did not end well for Kvasir's killers. They, in turn, were killed by a Jotun named Suttung, who took 3 vats of mead for himself, hidden deep in a mountain and guarded by his daughter Gunnloth. And Odin heard about what happened to his old friend Kvasir and decided he wanted to get the mead of poetry back. And in the Havamal, between 101 and 108, we have the story in Odin's own words of how he got the mead back. I sought that old Jotun, now safe on my back. Little served my silence there, but whispering many soft speeches, I won my desire in Suttung's halls. I bored me a road there with Rati's tusk, and made room to pass through the rock, while the ways of the Jotun stretched over and under. I dared my life for a draught. 'Twas Gunnlod who gave me on a golden throne a draught of the glorious mead, but with poor reward did I pay her back for her true and troubled heart. In a wily disguise I worked my will. Little is lacking to the wise. For the soul stirrer now, sweet meat of song, is brought to men's earthly abode. I misdoubt me if ever again I had come from the realms of the Jotun race, had I not served me of Gunnlod, sweet woman, her whom I held in mine arms. Came forth next day the dread frost giants, and entered the High One's hall. They asked, was the bale worker back, mid, or the powers, or had Suttung slayed him below? An oath ring Odin, I trow, had taken, but how shall one trust his troth? 'Twas he who stole the mead from Suttung, and Gunnlod caused to weep. Make a long story short, Odin gulped down the mead so it could escape in his belly. He betrayed Gunnlod, left her behind, and flew away back to Asgard with the mead in his belly. Suttung realized what had happened, flew after him. At one point, he got close enough to bite at Odin's tail feathers. Odin then saved himself by farting out a stream of mead from his behind, hitting Suttung in the face and getting within the walls of Asgard. And so whenever you hear a really bad poet, he or she did not drink from the good mead of poetry that Odin vomited back up at the end of this story. They drank from the poetry that came out the other end. And there's one other thing to note about Kvasir if you read your Snorri. Expect to be confused. Snorri claims at different points that Kvasir was a Vanir god sent to Asgard as one of the hostages, even though he was not a Vanir. He was both, transcending both, kind of that first child of the two. He also says Kvasir was still alive just before the time of Ragnarok and helped catch Loki after he admitted to his part in killing Balder. And yet we have other stories where Vanir is clearly killed and drained of all his blood. This confusion is perhaps one of the most glaring examples of how the stories and myths of the gods had shifted across time and countries long before Snorri wrote any of them down. Moving on now, let's look at Njord and Nerthus. We'll talk about Nerthus a little bit more when we get to the Germanic deities or from the continent, but we'll mention her here as well. So Njord is the father of Frey and Freya, and in the Eddas, he is best known as Skadi's husband. But we'll get more on that when we talk about Skadi in the next video. Njord is a god of the sea and the seashore. His animals are fish and seabirds, and he loves them both. The Norse considered him to be a rich god because of the boundless treasures of the sea, like fish, which belonged to him. He spent his days in his hall by the shore, Noatun, which means ship enclosure or boathouse. Njord is especially beloved of fishermen, who pray to him for a bounty of his wealth when they go out with their nets. Nerthus, who may have been Njord's first wife, or his sister, or a female aspect of Njord, or some combination of all three, is an ancient Baltic earth goddess mentioned by Tacitus. There are 2,000-year-old rock carvings associated with her worship, which have been uncovered at archaeological sites. So again, this is another example where we can see Njord and his aspect or wife, Nerthus, coming from a very local center of worship, and also, again, being tied to sort of the earth and nature. In his case, of course, the sea, but who knows? Up to you what you want to decide here. Frey and Freyr, the golden gods of the fields. He is the son of Njord and Nerthus and Freya's twin brother. He is a fertility god, closely tied to agriculture, and his power allows the fields to ripen and the crops to grow. He has two runes which are linked with him. One is Fehu, first of the first eight, or Freyr's eight in his honor. And again, when we talk about this first eight, we are talking very much about things that are very earthy, material. And the other rune, which we'll get to later, is in the third eight, the very more esoteric and divine eight. And that one is Ing, or Ingus, which is named after another of Freyr's names. And it represents the seed and male procreation. And curiously enough, the name Ingrid is actually derived from the name Frey under his pseudonym Ing. So if you meet an Ingrid, she is named for the god of fertility. His worship was so important that even long after Christianity took hold, his symbols remained part of farming culture in Northern Europe, with farmers baking and planting bread in the shape of a boar, Frey's sacred animal, to ensure a good crop, or wheeling statues of him through their fields. Grimbursti, pictured here, his golden bristled boar, could be described as having the color of wheat in his fur, and the boar impulse to dig furrows in the ground links them to the annual ritual of planting and sowing crops. Aside from the wooing of Gerd and dying at the hands of Surt during Ragnarok, Frey doesn't come up much in the Eddas. That does not mean he was not once an extremely important god, when his influence could make or break the livelihood of the farmers who worshipped him. Like his father was and often remains for fishermen, he is a god of daily life and economic necessity, not high tales and great adventures so much, but the very things that keep us alive, fed, and prosperous. And then we come to Freya, the beloved goddess Freya. When it comes to high tales and great adventures among the Vanir, Freya has some of the biggest and brightest of all those adventures. Among heathens and other Norse pagans to this day, she is one of the most important and influential goddesses of the pagan revival. Her beauty, her power, her cleverness make her one of the most noticeable goddesses in the surviving stories. And even if many of the Jotun try to treat her as a prize to be won, she never accepts her fate as anyone's trophy. Her golden necklace, Brisingar, was her price for sleeping with the dwarves who had made it. Her cloak of falcon feathers can take her anywhere in the 9 realms, and her field Folkvanger receives the first and finest warriors brought to Asgard by the Valkyries. Odin himself sought her out for her wisdom and her knowledge of satyr, and he learned that magic from her, even though it is supposed to be women only. When she doesn't go out on her cloak of feathers, she is pulled by a chariot team of cats. Of all the goddesses, she is one of the few who can make cats do what she wants. Or maybe they're just well rewarded with snuggles and catnip for putting up with pulling her chariot. Who knows? My cat certainly isn't talking. And now, what I brought up here is kind of an interesting debate I've heard about her. The Victorians, who were uncovering a lot of information on Freya, did not know what to make of a single. She has a husband, but he does not really feature prominently in her stories, except for when he's gone and she misses him. But for the most part, she's very much portrayed as independent and doing her own thing. So she was single-ish, or at least mostly living on her own, powerful, she's beautiful, she loves cats. And so even though if you really look at her in the stories, she's very much a powerful queen of Satyr and magic and even war, calling in the warriors to her home. She must have been a goddess of love, because of course she was, right? But how much of that, really? I mean, we see her, I think, in the sense, goddess of love is mostly her exuberance for life and pleasure in all of its forms. Love, magic, cats. She's a happy woman, and she does what she wants. And that's a lesson many, many witches can call upon from this goddess. I've also heard she likes strawberries. Passing that along. So, if you enjoyed this short foray into the Vanir tribe, stay tuned for the next video in this series, The Jotun, starring Angerboda, Njord, Utgar Loki, Gerd, Thrym, and Skadi. And we will, of course, be talking more about who were the Jotun, where do they come into this, and what do we know about them. So, blessed be rune weavers, and may your weavings be bright.